In a critical move to combat the growing financial strain on households and businesses, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's administration has rolled out a massive $135 billion stimulus package. This bold economic strategy, approved on a Friday, aims to provide relief from inflationary pressures, which have been deeply felt across Japan's economy. The stimulus package includes a variety of measures, such as energy subsidies and tax cuts, designed to ease the burden on consumers and business owners. This action comes at a time when Japan is facing rising inflation, and Prime Minister Takaichi has made it a central goal of her leadership to address this pressing issue. Takaichi, Japan's fifth Prime Minister in as many years, took office only a month ago, inheriting a country facing economic instability. Her predecessor, who lasted just a year in office, struggled with a series of poor election results, largely due to rising prices. The challenge of dealing with inflation has been a defining issue for the new leadership, and Takaichi has committed to curbing its effects through robust government intervention. However, as bold as the package may be, it comes with significant risks, particularly for Japan's already massive national debt. The core inflation rate for Japan, which excludes fresh food, has risen by 3% year on year, a slight increase from the 2.9% recorded in September. This inflation rate, while in line with market expectations, highlights the persistent financial pressure that the Japanese people are feeling. The rising costs are being felt across the economy, affecting everything from household budgets to business operations. For Prime Minister Takaichi, addressing inflation was one of her top priorities upon assuming office. It's a direct response to the economic instability that her predecessor's government faced, partly due to the increasing cost of living. Yet, while the stimulus package aims to provide much-needed relief to consumers and businesses, it has also sparked concerns about Japan's already swollen debt. The $135 billion stimulus will undoubtedly add to the national debt, which is among the highest in the developed world. Critics argue that these measures could push the country further into fiscal disarray, potentially jeopardizing long-term economic stability. In fact, government bond yields have surged to record highs, signaling heightened concern about Japan's fiscal health. The yen, too, has weakened in recent days, which only exacerbates Japan's economic challenges. A weaker yen means that the cost of imports rises, putting even more strain on an economy that is heavily dependent on foreign goods. Japan imports significant quantities of food, energy and raw materials necessary for its manufacturing sector. As these imports become more expensive, consumers will feel the pinch. The country's reliance on global markets makes it particularly vulnerable to shifts in exchange rates, and the depreciation of the yen could push inflation higher still. For households already struggling with rising prices, the weaker yen represents an additional challenge, making everything from food to fuel more expensive. Further complicating the situation is the fact that Takaichi is reportedly planning to delay the target date for achieving a primary budget surplus. Japan had set a goal of achieving a surplus by a certain year, but with the new stimulus measures, it's now looking increasingly likely that this target will be pushed further back. This delay raises questions about the government's long-term fiscal planning. While short-term relief is essential, especially in times of economic hardship, the government must also be mindful of the long-term consequences of increasing national debt. The rising cost of living, particularly for essential goods, is a key concern. One of the most glaring examples of inflationary pressure is the steep rise in rice prices, which have surged by 40% compared to last year. Rice, a staple of the Japanese diet, has become significantly more expensive, further straining household budgets. While the inflation rate for rice has slowed somewhat in recent months, the price hike still represents a serious burden for many families. For a country where food security and affordability have always been central to political discourse, this price increase has become a flashpoint for dissatisfaction among the public. This challenge is compounded by the fact that many of Japan's businesses are also feeling the squeeze of inflation. The cost of raw materials, energy and labour has risen, creating an environment in which companies are forced to either absorb the costs or pass them on to consumers. Many smaller businesses, in particular, have struggled to cope with these higher costs, and some have been forced to reduce staff or cut back on their operations. For Prime Minister Takaichi, these challenges represent a delicate balancing act. On the one hand, she must provide immediate relief to households and businesses. On the other, she must be careful not to exacerbate Japan's fiscal situation by overspending. In terms of consumer confidence, the government stimulus package is a clear attempt to reassure the public that the administration is taking the necessary steps to address the financial pressures that have been mounting over the past year. However, there is skepticism about whether the package will be enough to counteract the growing public concern over Japan's rising national debt and the long-term impact of inflation. The fact remains that Japan's economy is in a precarious position, and while immediate relief is necessary, the long-term viability of the country's fiscal policies remains in question. The government's response to inflation and the broader economic situation is not only crucial for Japan's domestic economy, but also for its standing on the global stage. As one of the world's largest economies, Japan's fiscal health has global implications. If the country's debt continues to grow unchecked, it could have a ripple effect on global financial markets. The international community will be watching closely to see how Takaichi navigates these challenges and whether her stimulus measures can provide the relief that Japan's citizens desperately need without sacrificing long-term fiscal health. Japan's economic situation is further complicated by its reliance on foreign trade. The country is one of the world's largest importers, particularly of energy and raw materials, which are essential for its manufacturing sector. As a result, changes in global markets have a significant impact on Japan's economy. The weaker yen is a reflection of this, as the country's trade balance shifts in response to both domestic and international economic pressures. The depreciation of the yen could lead to higher import prices, which would exacerbate inflationary pressures and further erode consumer purchasing power. At the same time, Japan's demographic challenges add another layer of complexity to the economic situation. With a rapidly aging population and a declining birth rate, Japan faces significant challenges in terms of labour force participation and future economic growth. The government's ability to address these demographic issues while also dealing with inflation and fiscal pressures will be critical in determining the country's long-term economic stability. Takaichi's administration, in seeking to address these challenges, must walk a fine line between offering short-term relief and ensuring long-term economic sustainability. The stimulus package represents an important first step, but it is clear that much more needs to be done to address the underlying structural issues that are driving inflation and fiscal imbalance. The next few years will be crucial for Japan as it attempts to balance the immediate needs of its citizens with the long-term health of its economy. As Prime Minister Takaichi navigates these complex economic challenges, her government's actions will have far-reaching consequences, not only for Japan, but for the global economy. The country's response to inflation and its fiscal policies will be closely watched by international observers as Japan's economic health is intertwined with global markets. Whether the stimulus package proves to be enough to stabilize Japan's economy in the short term while laying the groundwork for long-term fiscal discipline will determine the future trajectory of the country's economic landscape. For now, the people of Japan await to see how the government will balance its economic priorities in the coming months and years as the nation's fiscal challenges continue to evolve.